Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today we're here with an update from Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who wrote recently a very important essay on what he calls spheres of security, a approach to squaring the security circle of the 21st multipolar century. He's here to update us on this and on what's going on otherwise. Jeffrey, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Pascal.
Great having you, and really congratulations on that essay that you wrote. The link is, of course, in the description of this video. Can you maybe tell us why you came up with the idea of conceptualizing not spheres of influence, but spheres of security?
We hear a lot of resistance to spheres of influence, which is taken to mean in U.S. political parlance that big powers lean on small countries in their neighborhood, and that they regard those countries as part of their sphere of influence. By the way, the United States does that nonstop, but it criticizes any other power that would do the same as the United States does. And the claim from the US and European side is that Russia is trying to insist on a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, and especially in Ukraine right now, and that is illegitimate. My point is something else, and that is that what Russia has been saying, and I think consistently for 35 years, is that what Russia is concerned about is not interfering in the internal affairs even of Ukraine, much less Central and Eastern Europe, but not having Russia's own security threatened by the encroachments of the United States into its near neighborhood. This is completely different. What Russia is saying is that there needs to be a geographic sphere around Russia that protects Russia against U.S. missile systems, the U.S. military, the U.S. CIA operating freely to destabilize or to overthrow the Russian government, which is a stated aim, after all, of the CIA for decades. And what Russia is saying is there needs to be space between us and you, and Ukraine is that space. So there are two interpretations of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. One interpretation is Russia is trying to recreate its empire, either formally or informally, and that it regards Ukraine as part of its sphere of influence. And I think that this is wrong factually, and it certainly is not what Russian leaders have been saying since 1990 and 1991, which is that they do not want the United States threatening Soviet and then Russian security by putting U.S. weapon systems, missiles, military bases on the Soviet border when it was in 1990 under discussion, and on the Russian border since the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. Now, I therefore propose that we distinguish very clearly, analytically, in practice, in treaties, the concept of a sphere of security that is a legitimate claim, not only legitimate, completely prudential claim of a big power not to have other major powers right on their doorsteps with military or other security agency means that could be first strike capacity, decapitation strikes, or subversion, covert regime change operations, and that big powers sensibly declare a sphere of security around themselves in which other great powers should not tread. Now, I have to say this idea, and I distinguish that from spheres of influence in the pejorative sense that it is widely used, at least in US and European political parlance, to mean that Russia should not own and operate Ukraine as a vassal state or other states in the neighborhood, and Russia should not be allowed to claim a sphere of influence over its neighborhood because those countries don't want that kind of internal interference. Again, I want to state without question, the United States interferes directly throughout the Western Hemisphere in the latter sense, in the sense of a sphere of influence. It repeatedly overthrows governments, subverts governments. It has just put a bounty on the head of the president of Venezuela. It has warships in Venezuelan waters. It has threatened Panama. It repeatedly subverts the internal affairs of Western Hemisphere countries and of countries in other places. So even when the United States objects to any claim that Russia has or seeks a sphere of influence, it's hypocritical. But what I do want to say is the United States made the distinction 202 years ago, in effect, about a sphere of security and a sphere of influence, because the Monroe Doctrine, delivered to the U.S. Congress by President James Monroe on December 2nd, 1823, said that the United States would regard it as a direct threat to U.S. security of any European meddling in the affairs of the newly independent countries of the Western Hemisphere. What isn't remembered, by the way, about the Monroe Doctrine is the United States also said, and we, the United States, will not interfere in the affairs of Europe. So it's a reciprocal proposition. That claim in 1823, repeated often in the last 2 centuries, including by Donald Trump at the United Nations, as I sat in the UN General Assembly listening to him a few years ago, and he repeated the Monroe Doctrine. That is a claim of a sphere of security. It is a claim we do not want Russian military bases in Mexico. We don't want Chinese military bases in Mexico. We did not want Soviet military bases in Cuba. We nearly went to nuclear war over that in October 1962. The United States is run fundamentally by hypocrites and dunderheads, by people who have no principles and or people who are idiots. So I just want to be absolutely clear. I have no tolerance for American foreign policy at all. The only 2 presidents that have made sense of this in modern times have been Franklin Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy. Maybe John F. Kennedy was killed because he made sense about the call for peace. The rest of our presidents, including our current dunderhead and including other U.S. presidents, have argued that Russia has no security interest in what happens in Ukraine, no say at what happens in Ukraine, and after all, is only after a sphere of influence to subvert Ukraine's sovereignty. So the United States refuses to recognize exactly what it claims for itself in the Western Hemisphere. And incidentally, let me add another real dunderhead. I'm sorry to use the term, but these days I feel like we're ruled by idiots. And we should say it clearly because we don't deserve to die at the hands of these idiots who are going to lead us to nuclear war. And I'm talking about Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, who explicitly said last week that Russia has no say in who stations what troops and what weapon systems in Ukraine. After all, Ukraine's a sovereign country. It can do what it wants. This is the opposite of the Monroe Doctrine. This is the opposite of common sense. And this is the opposite of what I am proposing, which is that we legitimize, understand, accept as a matter of utter prudence and survival that great powers should not sit on the necks of other great powers, that nuclear superpowers should give some space. It doesn't mean to tolerate their misbehavior. It means to give some space so that we don't provoke a nuclear war. And specifically, and I'll just end here, and turn it back over to you, Pascal, the United States should not be in Ukraine. The United States should not be arming Taiwan. That's also the same sphere of security of China. And China and Russia should stay clear of the Caribbean and Mexico and Central America with their military bases. We should keep the great powers enough apart that we are not triggering World War III. And that's the idea.
I couldn't agree more. And it is very important here to state that your concept of spheres of security is a passive one, not one in which the one country controls that place and decides its affairs, but one in which that place passively contributes to the security of one and the other state. And very importantly, the people who deny this right to Russia, or who deny that Russia should have something like that in Ukraine, are the people who are not only in favor of a sphere of interest for the United States, they are in favor of the next step, which is a fear of interference for the United States. The United States is allowed to interfere in the internal affairs of Ukraine in order to help Ukraine, whatever it is that you want to put there. And the Maidan and so on, of course, are just ways of the US and the West to help Ukraine in order to be, in the end, a subservient vassal state, of course, that is run by the CIA, right? The CIA and the US military is still now in Germany, top-level generals still running a good part of the war against Russia through Ukraine. So Ukraine is not only just a sphere of interest where just the US says what it would like to happen, it's where it implements its policies. And the opposite of that is what you're proposing. And one more thing, the spheres idea is, of course, one in which you have centers, power centers, and around them emanate these spheres, and the place where the spheres meet should be passive in order to create stability between them. So we are closer to a concept of suzerainty and how how sovereignty then interacts in these different spheres than we are to clear cut. Here my border starts and here is yours. It's this appreciation that security is a reciprocal identity, right? That depends on each other and not just on one or the other side.
And that it fits exactly your idea that neutrality can be a key for mutual security. And the idea which the Soviet Union had, and I was reminded of this because the great historian Jeffrey Roberts sent you and me one of his articles from 2002 of the ideas of a very senior Soviet diplomat of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, Maxim Litvinov, who envisioned that Europe had to have essentially a zone of neutrality that ran through, in the north, Sweden and Finland, and then down through Austria, down to the Mediterranean, and that this would not be a zone in which the Soviet Union would aim to dominate, or that, as he thought, the British Empire would be the dominant power, that it would aim to dominate, but rather it would be neutral, peaceful. Neither side would claim it as a sphere of influence, but it would be a sphere of security for both sides, actually, that it would both protect the West from their fear of a Soviet incursion. It would protect the Soviet Union from its fear of a repeat of the Nazi Germany invasion of the Soviet Union. And it made absolutely perfect sense. It was implemented in the case of Austria in 1955 when the Soviet Union and Austria agreed that Austria would become a neutral country and the Soviet occupation forces would leave Austria on that basis, knowing that Austria would not join NATO, but it would be neutral. The Soviet Union left in 1955, and Austria was never bothered again by the Soviet Union or by Russia. So the idea proved itself, and they wanted that to apply to Germany as well. And the United States, of course, turned that down.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, if I may say, Pascal, because I was just looking at remarks by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who I think did an enormous amount of damage in messing up the whole post-1991 potential for a real era of peace. Brzezinski said that after the end of the Soviet domination in Central and Eastern Europe, NATO had to enlarge to fill the security void left by the withdrawal of the Soviet Union. What a weird idea that that's a security void rather than a neutral zone that neither side bothers and that protects both sides. So the American mentality is there is no such thing as neutrality. There is no such thing as a security zone of anyone else but the United States, because the U.S. claims it for the whole Western Hemisphere. But Russia, no legitimate interest at all of whether the U.S. has its Aegis missile systems in Cuba or military bases in Cuba or the CIA. I don't mean Cuba, Ukraine, excuse me, that Russia has no interest whatsoever if the U.S. has its missile systems or the CIA or its military in Ukraine. That's the mentality. That's what Mark Rutte explicitly said. That's what's going to get us all killed if we don't learn to stay out of the way of the other big powers, not to let them do mischief, but quite the contrary, to stop bothering them and provoking them.
That's what the with us or against us crowd in the US, not only the neocons, but the others, the influenced ones too, cannot understand. They're psychologically not able to have a third concept. It's either with us or against us. Anything that's not with us is automatically against us and needs to be fought against. Either primarily as the primary target, like Russia or China, or secondarily, like the neutralists, like those who want to stay out, and they need to be eliminated, like Mr. Yanukovych in Ukraine, who wanted to stay out. He was not pro-Russian. He was pro-Ukrainian. He was pro-neutrality because he understood that. But he was taken out, and others are being taken out. And just let's bring this back to where we are, because the solution is not to teach the people the with us or against people. They are lost. They're a lost cause. So we need to deal with them. The question is how to make this obvious to the places that we need to defend their neutrality. Let's take the example of Doha, Qatar, which is a tiny little Gulf state, and in the last couple of months it has been attacked twice because it hosts U.S. bases, and now because it actually hosts diplomatic events and but Hamas, right? So basically, isn't this a primary case to show how you make yourself a target by hosting the powers or belligerents? And I'm not to say that I put Hamas on the same level and so on, because I don't.
But what's important about the Hamas targeting today by Israel, bombing Qatar because of that, is that this wasn't the Hamas military.
No.
These were literally the negotiators that were considering literally today a proposal of Donald Trump. Israel, with this murderous regime, is against, by concept, any negotiated outcome, because what it wants only is the us, is the dominance, it's the power. So whenever negotiations come close between the United States and Hamas or the United States and Iran, Israel makes a military strike. This is exactly what happened a few weeks ago when the United States and Iran were making progress on the nuclear arms question that that Iran would agree to a monitored system to end any doubts that it does not want atomic weapons, but at the same time, the counterpoint would be that the United States would end sanctions and end attacks to undermine the Iranian government. And they were in the sixth round, entering the sixth round of negotiations, and Israel attacked. And then the United States, because it is subservient to the Zionist lobby, which it is totally shockingly, went ahead and attacked Iran also, even as they were claiming to negotiate. And this is the same that just happened with Hamas. This isn't an attack just on Hamas. This is an attack on the negotiators to reach a permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah.
I want to come back to this us versus them because we're completely, like you say, drawn into this. And the American mentality is that there is no such thing as neutrality. Neutrality is against us, exactly as they say. And we had a discussion a few weeks ago because I reread for the first time in many years the so-called Melian dialogue in Thucydides' Peloponnesian Wars. Everybody should read this. It's truly chilling. What it is a lecture by the arrogant Athenian to the people of the island of Melos. The island of Melos in 416 BC wanted to be neutral in the conflict between Athens and Sparta. And Athens, the Athenian general, tells the people of Melos, you cannot be neutral. You are either with us or you're against us. And if you claim neutrality, we will kill all of you, all of the men, and we will sell all of the women and children into slavery. And damn it, that's what they really did. The great democracy of Athens went and slaughtered the men of Melos because they wanted neutrality. That's the American mentality. And it's explained precisely. And the Athenian general, dripping with arrogance, of course, explaining that the mighty do what they can and the weak do what they must, and explaining that the Melians must, to survive, do what we tell you to do. The Athenians say you can't be neutral because we demand that you not be. And if you then persist in being neutral, you are contradicting us. And if you contradict us and we let you contradict us, that shows we're weak. So we will never let you contradict us. That's the logic of the Athenian general. So we're going to have to kill you if you just want to be neutral. And lo and behold, that's what history actually demonstrated.
And that is the realist case for a realist neutrality. It doesn't necessarily mean that Melos should have geared up and made itself a vassal of Sparta and then gone with Sparta to war with Athens. That's not the point. The point actually that the realists make is that you need a minimum of security for yourself in order to protect that. So when we take this example to Qatar, what Qatar should be doing is to protect its neutral space and be able to protect the diplomats. So you need a minimum of defensive equipment to defend against Israeli strikes and others, and you must not signal that you are a threat to Iran in order to not make yourself an obvious target, which is what happened, and thereby then create a sphere of security. But actually the sphere of security in this conceptualization rests upon the shoulders of those independent states that are in neither camp but want to be friends to both and foe to neither, as Thucydides called it. The question is how we can break through this concept, especially in Europe and other places, that it's either with the Americans or against the Americans, right? It's not what it is. We need something better.
It's so interesting. Of course, when I raise this with our good friend John Mearsheimer, and people will find our discussion about this online on your website. John said, "Well, nice idea, Jeff, but impossible." Uh, he has the idea that the big powers just inevitably clash. That's what big powers do. They will never leave good enough alone. They will never leave Ukraine neutral. So it really is us versus them because, as Brzezinski said, and I quoted earlier, it would be a void. The idea is neutrality is like a vacuum. It will suck in somebody. So they don't accept, John doesn't believe that it's feasible to have these zones of security that keep the powers away. He's not against the concept. He just says that the big powers are locked in an iron cage where they're doomed to fight each other. And his great book, which is a great book, by the way, is called The Tragedy of Great Power Politics.
Yeah.
I've always said to John, we need to get away from tragedy, especially in the nuclear age. We need to solve this, not only to understand it, but to solve it. So I do believe, of course, the ones in the middle should understand this. We should help them understand this. We should give ways to bolster that. But we really need the American people, the people of Europe. Maybe they already do understand it. This is not the road to security that we are following. My point for the United States is that from the moment the neocons absolutely took charge in 1991 in the US, we have had nothing but a decline of US security. It's been the toughest period. It's been wars of choice. It's been overthrows of governments such as the Maidan in 2014. It has not brought US security. And I cite the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which was 17 minutes from midnight when Bill Clinton inherited the post-Cold War, supposedly. But then he messed it up. And then George W. Bush Jr. messed it up. And then Obama further messed it up. Then Trump 1 further messed it up. And then Biden further messed it up. Every president has left the doomsday clock closer to midnight than when they arrived in office. So is America safer by having overthrown a government in Ukraine, by having pushed NATO enlargement, by having denied Russian sphere of security, by having said to Ukraine, no, you can't be neutral? And by the way, saying it literally to Zelensky in the spring of 2022, when Zelensky was about to sign a peace agreement with Russia based on neutrality. And the United States and Boris Johnson at the time, both Biden and Johnson, said to Zelensky, no, you don't sign that, you fight on. That's about 1 million dead in Ukraine, less than we have had since then. So I want the American people to understand this is a disaster for our security. This isn't that we're somehow struggling against Russia because we have to. We should be leaving precisely a neutral zone so that we aren't in each other's face, so that we have some distance. And of course, the hypocrisy of the United States knows no bounds. Donald Trump has gotten very exercised about the fact that in the Panama Canal, there are 2 port service operations owned by, oh my God, heaven forbid, Hong Kong companies. That's in Panama. That is Port Services by Hutchinson of a long, distinguished Hong Kong shipping service. And Trump says that is a threat to American security. But in the meantime, NATO on the Russian border, oh, no problem. Trump, once in a while, seems to accept that, but he never says it clearly to the American people, nor to the Europeans. And the Europeans to this moment, and Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, say exactly the opposite, that Russia has no security concerns that are legitimate.
Yeah. Very last question, and I'll let you go right after that. But Donald Trump decided to rename the Department of Defense back into Department of War. Do you think that we are getting closer to a moment of, let's say, clarity in what we're actually dealing with when it comes to this whole security sphere, where, like, for the longest time, especially in Europe and the US, we've been pretending that everything is about defense, when in fact what has been going on is very, very much offense and very much offensive, like war making in different various stages. Do you think that we at least get to more clarity about this fact, or what does this indicate to you?
Well, it indicates to me, yes, that it is more truthful in the way we behave to call it a Department of War, but it's also more frightening, because I would rather have a Department of Defense that actually operated on the basis of defense than have a Department of War that actually operates on the basis of war. If I had confidence that the American political system would deliver peace, one could then say, well, at least that's semantic clarity. But the truth is, the American political system delivers war. The American system is currently actively engaged in a genocide in Palestine. This is not just an Israeli operation. This is an Israeli-U.S. operation. Israel is, pushing the buttons and pulling the trigger, but the weapons are American weapons. The intelligence, so-called, to do this, which is also a cruel misnomer, is Palantir, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon, it's other big tech companies that are providing cloud services and AI to Israeli defense forces as a genocide and a mass starvation takes place. So we really have a Department of War, but nothing to be happy about with that relabeling. It's absolutely horrifying. Our Congress is completely mute on this. We are in the hands of basically, completely security state apparatus, and at least nominally in the hands of one person who does what he wants and announces it on Truth Social, and it's all very bizarre and unstable. And the fact of the matter is, we don't have clarity on any issues, the U.S. vis-a-vis Russia, the U.S. vis-a-vis the Palestinian people or the Arab nations, the U.S. vis-a-vis Iran. We negotiate 5 weeks and then bomb them on the 6th week. The U.S. vis-a-vis China. This is an extraordinarily dangerous situation. Nothing is rational and logical in the traditional sense. We're in the hands of whims, of secrecy, of game playing, as if this wasn't really the nuclear age that it is.
Yeah. We need to get out of the game and back into reality. And of course, in reality, your constitution tries to deal with that and invests war-making power into Congress and not into the president. But all of that is mixed up and messed up, and it needs restructuring. Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much for your time today.
Well, great to be with you. Thanks.